Elena had never felt the walls close and around her so tightly before. It was as if the very air she breathed was laced with something insidious, something that made every inhalation feel like an act of surrender. The house, the place that had once offered her comfort, now felt foreign, alien, even. It had been hours since anyone had spoken to her, and yet she could feel their eyes on her, lurking just beyond the edges of her awareness. "You're not alone," the voice whispered, soft yet unmistakably clear, as if it came from the air itself, or perhaps from deep within her mind. She clenched her fists, nails digging into the palms of her hands as she sat rigidly on the couch, her gaze darting around the room. There was no one here, but the feeling of presence, of something watching her, was overwhelming. It wasn't just in her head, it was everywhere. She could hear the whispering, the muffled voices, the ones that weren't real but felt more real than anything else. They were there, in the corners of the room, in the shadows behind the curtains, in the silence that hung thickly between every breath she took. "Everyone's involved," the voice continued, and this time it wasn't just an echo in her mind. It felt like it came from the very walls. "They're all in on it, every single one of them." Elena's heart began to race. She didn't know who they were, but she could sense it. There was a conspiracy, something hidden beneath the surface. Everyone, even the people she had trusted most, were part of it. They were lying to her, manipulating her, keeping her trapped. She tried to shake the thought away, but it clung to her like a second skin, suffocating her, pulling her deeper into a spiraling descent. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her paranoid reverie. Her body stiffened, every muscle tensed, and she froze. Should she answer it, or should she hide? Was it one of them? Someone coming to finish what they had started? Her breath hitched in her throat, and she glanced toward the window, the curtains swaying ever so slightly in the breeze, a shadow moving just outside. The figure was standing there, watching her. No one had come for her in days, not since the last incident when she'd snapped, shattered under the weight of her mind's betrayals. The idea of someone seeing her so broken, so vulnerable, terrified her. She couldn't trust them. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Elena's mind raced. She had to make a choice. Was it real? Was it just another trick of the mind? A figment of the hallucinations that had plagued her for so long? Her skin prickled with the sensation that the world around her was alive, watching, waiting, just as trapped in the chaos of her mind as she was. "Answer it," the voice urged her. "They're waiting. They want you to see the truth." But what truth? Elena could feel the pressure building in her chest, her thoughts growing muddled, swirling in a haze of doubt and fear. She moved slowly toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. She hesitated for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob, before she finally twisted it and pulled the door open. No one was there. The emptiness outside sent a chill crawling up her spine. A draft stirred the fallen leaves in the yard, but there was no sign of anyone. The sensation of eyes on her, watching her every move, grew more intense, the feeling of being observed becoming unbearable. She stepped outside, looking around wildly, but there was nothing, only the wind, the silence, and the gnawing sensation that someone was lurking just beyond her sight. "Stop pretending," the voice inside her head hissed. "You know they're out there. You know they're always watching." Elena slammed the door shut, heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled back, tripping over her own feet, and collapsed onto the couch. Her breath was shallow, quick, and ragged as the walls seemed to close in further, the room spinning around her. She gripped her head, trying to stave off the dizziness, but it was no use. The paranoia was too strong now. "They're all part of it," she whispered aloud to herself, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Everyone." The thought became an obsession. She could see their faces now, The people she had once loved, her family, her friends, all of them conspiring against her. She didn't know how or why, but they were. They were all in on it. Every smile, every kind word, every gesture now felt like a hidden lie, a part of a bigger game, a trap. As her mind spiraled deeper, her thoughts turned to the people closest to her. Her brother, Simon, always so concerned about her. Was it genuine concern, or was he just playing his part in the plan? Her therapist, Dr. Myers, had been so helpful, hadn't she? Or had she been part of the scheme all along, guiding Elena further into madness to break her completely? Each face she thought of now became a mask, a facade, something designed to deceive her, to make her feel like she was in control when in fact, they were pulling the strings. The whispers continued, now louder, more insistent. They don't want you to know the truth. They're hiding it from you. She couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that would prove she wasn't losing her mind. But there was nothing. Nothing but the creeping sensation that everyone she knew, everyone she trusted, was against her. Elena's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She needed to call someone. Simon, Dr. Myers, anyone. But as she scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hesitated above the names. What if they were all in on it too? What if calling them was just another step in the trap? Her vision blurred, the edges of the room bending and warping as her mind unraveled even further. The voice in her head, the one that had guided her deeper into this madness, was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. You can't escape it, it roared. They'll never let you go. Elena sat frozen on the couch, the words of the voice still echoing through her mind like a broken record. They'll never let you go. The sound reverberated, louder now, bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. It felt as though the house itself was alive, pulsing with the rhythm of her thoughts. But where was the voice coming from? Was it her mind? Or was it real? For the first time, the question of her own sanity felt far too real. She couldn't shake the image of the empty doorway, the way the outside world had felt distant, unreachable, as if some invisible force had sealed her in. The silence was oppressive now, so heavy it was suffocating. It had always been there, lingering beneath the surface, but now it was deafening. Every breath felt too loud. Every heartbeat a sharp reminder how alone she truly was. Then the silence fractured. A voice, low and almost familiar, whispered her name. Elena. Her body jerked at the sound. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be alone. She could never be alone again. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source. But there was nothing, no one. The walls were empty, the air still, and the silence threatened to swallow her whole once more. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands trembling as they gripped the edges of the couch. Please, not again. Not this. But it wasn't over. Elena, Elena, can you hear me? The voice was closer now, almost as if it were standing right beside her. She clutched her ears, desperate to block it out, but it grew louder, the words clearer. You're not mad, it murmured, but they want you to think you are. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. It was familiar, but twisted somehow. It didn't sound like her own thoughts anymore. This voice, it was different, deeper, more insidious. Why are they doing this to me? Elena whispered, her voice barely audible, her breath ragged. She hadn't realized she was speaking out loud until the words had already left her mouth. She sat there, trembling, her pulse thumping in her ears as she awaited an answer. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the voice fell silent. The absence of sound was somehow worse than the voice itself. It left a vacuum in her mind, a vast emptiness that threatened to consume everything. She felt the pressure in her chest, the crushing weight of her thoughts, closing in around her. She reached for the phone again. Maybe this time it wouldn't be a mistake. Maybe it wouldn't be part of the game they were playing with her. She dialed Simon's number. Her hands slick with sweat, her breath shallow. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Pick up. Please pick up. But it didn't. She let the phone slip from her hand, her fingers curling into fists against the cushions. Maybe I should have called Dr. Myers instead, she thought, her mind already racing with the next plan of escape. But the rational part was fading, slipping into the cracks of her fractured psyche. Every option felt like a trap now. There was no one she could trust. No one. She was caught in a maze of her own making, the walls shifting with every step she took, and all the while, the voice taunted her, a mocking echo that made her doubt everything. The world is an illusion, it had said before. It's all a lie. Elena ran her hands through her hair, pulling at the strands, a futile attempt to tear away the thoughts that were gnawing at her mind. The house felt different now, as though the very walls were conspiring against her. The air seemed heavier, thicker, pressing down on her with an unseen force. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before, each second stretching out into an eternity. Each tick a reminder that she was running out of time. Her mind scrambled for answers, but all she found were empty echoes, fragments of reality that no longer made sense. She couldn't trust her thoughts anymore. She couldn't trust her senses. Everything around her had turned into a blur, a swirling vortex of confusion and terror. Are they watching me now? Her gaze darted to the windows. Were the blinds drawn tight? She couldn't remember. But then something shifted. A shadow, long and thin, flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. There was nothing there, only the empty corner of the room. But it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, watching her, waiting. Please, she whispered into the silence. Stop. But the house, or whatever it was now, didn't listen. The echo of her voice bounced off the walls, but no one answered. There was only that unsettling silence that followed, the kind that spoke louder than any words ever could. And then it happened again. A sound, a whisper, this time coming from inside her own head. You're not alone, Elena. She bolted upright, her eyes wide with panic. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was clearer, more distinct, and the voice was no longer a mere taunt. It was an accusation. You've always known, it said. They're all part of it. All of them. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the fabric of her shirt, the overwhelming weight of her thoughts pressing down on her chest. It was too much. She couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around her, the floor beneath her feet tilting as if she were falling deeper into the abyss of her own mind. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, desperate to block it out. She tried to scream, to call for help, but the sound caught in her throat. The silence that followed her scream was deafening. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there, locked in the claustrophobic grip of her own spiraling mind. All she knew was that something was coming. Something was waiting just beyond the threshold of her perception. And when it came, there would be no escape. She had to face it. But the truth? Elena wasn't sure she was ready for it. Elena couldn't remember when she had last looked in the mirror. It had been days, maybe even longer. The thought of seeing herself, of confronting the stranger who would replace her reflection, filled her with dread. But today, it was different. Something inside her stirred. Something that made her feel as though she had no choice. The voice had stopped, its echoes fading into a heavy silence that pressed down on her. Yet, the absence of sound was far worse than the maddening whispers that consumed her for so long. It left her feeling hollow. She couldn't stay in this place anymore, this house, this prison. She needed to see herself again. needed to know if she was still there beneath the layers of fear, confusion, and madness. Her legs were shaky as she stood, each step toward the hallway feeling like a journey towards something she couldn't yet define. The walls around her seemed to warp, bending at strange angles, as if the very space itself was uncertain. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her hand reached out, brushing against the cold surface of the wall as she passed. The contact was grounding, a reminder that the world around her, at least in this moment, was real. At the end of the hall, the mirror waited. It was tall, old-fashioned, framed in dark, intricate wood, beautiful but haunting, like something from another time. She had always found it comforting before, a reflection of herself in a world that had, at times, felt far too chaotic. But today, it felt like a portal to something darker. Elena stood in front of it, staring at her own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked like her, but she wasn't. Her face was pale, eyes sunken and wide, skin blotchy with exhaustion and fear. There was a wildness in her gaze, something desperate, like a caged animal fighting for freedom. Her hair, once neatly kept, now hung around her face in disarray, a symbol of the chaos that had overtaken her mind. She could feel the mirror's pull, like it was drawing her in, calling to her. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing as she studied her reflection. The room around her seemed to blur at the edges, the glass of the mirror sharpening everything in front of her. And then it happened. The reflection shifted. For a moment, Elena thought it was just her eyes playing tricks, the fatigue making her hallucinate. But as she stared deeper, the reflection, did not move the way she did. The woman in the glass was smiling. Elena froze, the blood draining from her face. She hadn't smiled, not in days, not since everything started slipping. But there it was, a grin, wide and sharp, stretching across the face of the woman in the mirror. Her reflection's eyes glinted with something darker, something malicious. "It's you," Elena thought, her mind racing. "It's me, but not me." Her pulse quickened, the room spinning as the reflection's grin widened, its eyes narrowing in a cruel imitation of her own fear. It was as if the woman in the mirror knew her, knew every fragile piece of her soul, and was enjoying every second of it. "Who are you?" Elena breathed, her voice trembling. The reflection tilted its head, mimicking her every movement with eerie precision, but it didn't speak. It didn't need to. Elena's breathing quickened as she leaned in closer, trying to make sense of what was happening. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, the heavy, erratic rhythm pulsing through her chest. And then, without warning, the reflection's face contorted. The smile twisted into something grotesque, the eyes narrowing into slits, a malevolent presence radiating from the glass. It was no longer her. It wasn't even human. In a panic, Elena recoiled, her hand reaching out to touch the mirror's surface, as if somehow, if she could make contact, she could break the spell. The instant her fingers brushed against the cool glass, a jolt of electricity shot through her, sending a wave of nausea crashing through her. She stumbled back, her mind reeling, but as she pulled away, the reflection remained. It didn't change. It didn't move, not in the way she did. It was locked in place, smiling that unnatural smile, its eyes gleaming with a terrible knowing. Elena's chest heaved, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The reflection didn't mirror her anymore. It was alive, independent, taunting her, mocking her fragile state. It was as if it was trying to break free, to take her place. "You don't belong here," she whispered to the reflection, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You're not me." But the reflection didn't care. It was alive. She could feel it, the darkness rising from within the glass, crawling into her thoughts. She stumbled back, her legs weak beneath her, and in that instant, the room around her seemed to shift, warping in the same way the mirror had warped her reflection. The walls pressed in, the space growing tighter and tighter. She was drowning in her own mind, suffocating beneath the weight of her own fear. The laughter came then, soft like a murmur at first, but growing louder, more distinct, until it was all around her, rising from the corners of the room, filling the air. It was the laughter of the reflection, of the thing in the mirror that wasn't her. "You can't escape," it taunted. "You've always known. This is who you are." Elena gasped for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The reflection's voice was in her head now, echoing the words, distorting them, twisting them until they became her own thoughts. It wasn't just a mirror anymore. It was her mind, unraveling, collapsing into itself. "No," Elena whispered, shaking her head as she backed away, her hand pressing against the wall to steady herself. "No, this isn't real. This isn't me." But it was. The reflection in the mirror, the thing that had once been her, was not her at all. It was a part of herself she had buried, the darkness she had tried to suppress, the parts of her that had been twisted and broken by everything she had endured. It was her own fractured soul, staring back at her with malevolent eyes, claiming that it had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. And now, Elena realized it wanted out. Elena couldn't stop shaking. Her hands, slick with sweat, trembled uncontrollably as she sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, her gaze fixed on a mirror that still reflected that twisted version of herself. The thing in the glass, that grotesque mockery, had faded with the passing of time, perhaps just another figment of her unraveling mind, but the sense of dread it left behind clung to her like a dark shroud. The walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own, a slow, thudding beat that echoed her heartbeat, pushing her to the edge of madness. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the room itself was closing in on her, threatening to collapse beneath the weight of her fear. She had to make sense of it, had to understand. It was the only way to survive, to break free from this spiraling nightmare. But there were no answers, only pieces. Her thoughts scattered like broken glass across the floor. Everything was slipping through her fingers. She couldn't hold on to anything anymore. The puzzle of her life, the one she had once thought was whole and complete, had shattered into jagged fragments that no longer fit together. There were pieces, too many pieces, and none of them made sense. Elena's mind swam with fragmented memories, flashes of moments that no longer held meaning. Faces, names, places, the images of people she had once known, people she had trusted, now felt like ghosts, faint outlines of figures drifting just beyond her reach. Her own reflection had taunted her with the truth. She didn't recognize herself anymore. But more than that, there was something missing, something fundamental that she couldn't place. Why can't I remember? The memories that clung to her were all broken, incomplete, each one like a torn page of a book whose story was slowly slipping away. She could recall small details, the scent of her mother's perfume, the feeling of Simon's embrace, the quiet hum of her old childhood home. But when she reached for more, the connections frayed and vanished. She picked up a photo from the floor. It had fallen from the mantel at some point, its edges curled and torn. The image was a faded blur, faces unrecognizable. Her family, was it from a birthday, a holiday? She couldn't recall. Who are these people? Her hand shook as she turned the photo over, searching for any clue that might tell her, when it was taken, who was in it. There was a name scrawled on the back, in faded ink. Together, always. She had no memory of it. No memory of that moment. No memory of the people in the picture. It was as if they were strangers. But she had to know. She had to remember. Frustration burned through her chest, a hot, bitter wave. It's all slipping away. It doesn't make sense. The walls around her felt as if they were closing in, suffocating her under their weight. The pieces, the broken fragments of her life, were scattered everywhere, just beyond her reach. Each one was a key, but none of them fit the lock. Elena closed her eyes, trying to force herself to calm down, to collect her thoughts. But the more she tried to organize the pieces in her mind, the more they scattered. Nothing was whole anymore. Everything was disjointed, like a shattered mirror, reflecting 1,000 different versions of herself, none of them making sense. But then, something clicked. A sudden, sharp realization stabbed her mind like a needle, and the room seemed to freeze. It was a memory, a flash, a moment that cut through the fog. It was distant, but it was real. A conversation, a whisper. "Elena, you don't remember, do you?" The voice was Simon's. But it wasn't the Simon she knew now. It was the Simon from before everything had fallen apart. She remembered standing in the hallway of their old home, her brother's face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He had said something to her, something important, something she had pushed away, locked deep inside herself. What had he said? She couldn't remember the words, but the feeling lingered, that cold, sharp edge of something unsaid, something hidden beneath the surface. There was a secret, a truth buried in her past, and was calling to her now, from the very core of her being. The puzzle pieces began to shift, falling into place with horrifying clarity. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't crazy. Something had happened, something that had been buried. Elena's chest tightened as the pieces continued to fall into place, like gears turning a clock. Each part of the puzzle fitting together in a way that made sense. Too much sense. She was being watched. She had always been watched. But who had done it? Who had manipulated her life so thoroughly that even she couldn't distinguish between what was real and what wasn't? Who had woven these lies into her reality, planting false memories, and twisting her own history until it was unrecognizable? Elena's mind flashed the image of the mirror, the face that wasn't hers, the smile that was too wide, too sharp. It was me. It was always me, but not the me I know, the me that's been hiding. The pieces, her memories, the broken fragments, were falling into place now, but they weren't pieces of a life she recognized. They were fragments of a carefully constructed illusion. She had been living in a false reality, a reality created by someone else. And as much as she wanted to fight it, the truth was becoming undeniable. But why? The question burned through her. Why had they done this to her? What had they wanted from her? The more she searched, the more it became clear. There was something in her past, something that she had been a part of, something dark, and she had forgotten it. The voice that had haunted her, the reflection in the mirror, it was all tied to this, to whatever had been hidden from her. The answers were there, just beyond her reach, waiting to be uncovered. And the longer she waited, the deeper she sank into this nightmare. But now, at least, she knew one thing. The puzzle was complete. And the truth, it was coming. And it was far worse than she could have imagined. The truth was a shadow, elusive and flickering, dancing just out of reach. Elena could feel it lingering around her, tugging at the edges of her mind like an insistent whisper. But every time she tried to grasp it, it slipped away. The house had become a maze, a labyrinth of twisted halls and fragmented rooms that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy, and even the simplest of sounds felt like they were amplified 1,000 times, echoing in her skull, reminding her that she was no longer in control of her own reality. It was as though the very fabric of the world around her had begun to unravel, piece by piece, exposing the raw, terrifying truth beneath. What was real? What was illusion? She no longer knew. The truth was not a comforting thing. It was a jagged knife, cutting deep into her soul, pulling her further into the abyss. She wandered through the house, aimlessly, as if she were searching for something. But what? Answers? A way out? It felt like she was walking in circles, retracing her steps over and over, but each time the surroundings were slightly different, warped by the distortion of her fractured mind. Everything is a lie. The thoughts circled in her brain like a mantra, a constant hum that never stopped. It was becoming unbearable, this endless questioning. Was any of it real? She stumbled into the living room, where the old grandfather clock stood silent in the corner. The clock had always been a familiar presence in this house, a constant tick-tock that marked the passing of time. But now, it stood still, its hands frozen at exactly 3:17. A part of her wanted to reach out and move them, force time to continue. But she knew it wouldn't help. Nothing would help. The illusion. That's what this was, wasn't it? The walls, the house, the people in her life. All of it. A carefully constructed facade, meant to keep her trapped in a false version of reality. She had been living in a lie, and now the truth was seeping through the cracks, poisoning everything. And yet, she couldn't remember when it had started. When had this all begun? When had the line between what was real and what was imagined become so blurry that she couldn't tell one from the other? Was it the mirror? The voice? The figure that had whispered her name in the dark? Her thoughts spiraled. A dizzying spiral of confusion and panic. She closed her eyes, willing the feeling to pass, but the more she tried to escape it, the stronger it became. The reality she had once trusted, her family, her home, her life, was slipping through her fingers like sand, and she was powerless to stop it. What if they had been lying to me? What if everything is fabricated? The thought consumed her, gnawing at her insides until she could hardly breathe. She thought of Simon, her brother, and how his face had looked when she had last seen him, torn between concern and something else. Was he part of it too? Had he been hiding the truth from her all this time? The echo of the voice returned then, a soft murmur just at the edge of her hearing. You're just a puppet, Elena. Her heart skipped a beat as she whipped around, searching for the source of the whisper. The room was empty, the silence deafening, but the words lingered, thick in the air, wrapping around her throat like a noose. Everything around you is a lie. The words felt like a slap across her face, cold and sharp. She staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. No, this can't be real. It can't be. But deep down, she knew it was. The truth was unraveling, piece by piece. And the more she tried to ignore it, the louder it became. This is not real. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the people around her. It was everything. The world, as she had known it, was a mirage, a delicate illusion that had been carefully crafted to keep her in check. The false reality had been constructed around her to prevent her from seeing the truth. But who had done this? Why? Her mind churned, but every attempt to piece it together only led her deeper into the fog. The more she tried to reach for the truth, the more she realized how far out of reach it was. The puzzle pieces she had gathered, fragments of memories, glimpses of faces, didn't fit together. They never had. Elena looked around the room at the objects that had once been so familiar to her. The worn couch, the paintings on the walls, the dust motes floating in the sunlight. They were wrong. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. The shadows cast by the furniture were too long, too sharp. The light coming through the windows was harsh, too bright, as if the sun itself were pressing it on her, demanding to reveal the truth. What am I missing? She rushed toward the window, her hands fumbling to open the blinds. She needed to see outside. She needed to feel the world beyond this place. But when she peered out, all she saw was darkness. The night had fallen, but not in the natural way. The sky was pitch black, no stars, no moon, no light at all. It was as if the world beyond the glass had ceased to exist. Her breath caught in her throat. She slammed her hand against the glass. her pulse thudding in her ears. The house was trapped in this bubble of darkness, cut off from everything else. She was cut off. Everything is fake. The words rang in her ears louder now, as though they were coming from inside her own mind, growing louder with each passing moment. She pulled away from the window, her hands shaking, her heart racing. The walls around her seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with each breath. She needed to escape. She had to get out of this place. But where could she go? If the world outside didn't exist, if it was just as fabricated as everything inside this house, then where could she go to find the truth? Her thoughts spiraled, her mind a whirl of confusion, terror, and despair. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, bound by invisible chains that were tightening with every passing moment. There was no way out, no escape. She was trapped, and as she sank to the floor, her back pressed against the cold wall, the realization hit her like a tidal wave. There is no truth. There is no reality. There is only this. The line between reality and fantasy was thinning. It had started gradually, almost imperceptibly. A strange feeling would come over her at times, as if she were on the edge of waking from a dream or slipping into one. At first, she thought it was just a strain of her mind, a result of the endless days of confusion and dread. But now it was undeniable. The world around her was no longer clear. It was a haze, a blur of indistinct shapes and flickering images, like an old film reel that had been torn, each frame missing or distorted. Every corner of the house seemed to shift, to change when she wasn't looking. Sometimes she would turn her head and find something moved, a chair that hadn't been there before, or a door she didn't remember opening. It was as if she were walking in two worlds at once. And that's when it happened. One night, as the clock struck 3, the same time as before, she found herself in the living room again, standing before the window, the darkness outside pressed against the glass, a suffocating blackness that stretched into nothingness. She tried to shake it off, tried to ignore the creeping sense of dread that clawed at her chest, but it wasn't working. The air felt thick, as if the very atmosphere around her was holding its breath. A flicker in the corner of her vision. She whipped around, her heart pounding. Nothing was there, but when she turned back to the window, the scene outside had changed. The black void was gone. Instead, a street stretched out before her, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. It was an ordinary street, quiet and peaceful, the kind of street she remembered from her childhood. The houses were familiar, the trees swaying gently in the wind. It was a peaceful, perfect night. She took a step toward the window, her breath catching in her throat. How could this be? How could it be real? She pressed her hand against the glass, trying to push through, trying to reach the world outside. The window felt real. The coolness of the glass beneath her fingertips, the faint vibration of the world beyond. For a moment, she forgot herself entirely, lost in the comforting illusion of normalcy. But as she pressed harder, the scene began to distort. The trees warped and twisted, the houses melting into shadows, the streetlights flickering erratically. It was as if she were watching a dream unravel before her eyes, the fabric of reality pulling apart. Elena stepped back, her breath quickening. She wasn't sure what she was seeing anymore. Was this real? Was she awake? Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, each beat a violent reminder that the line between the waking world and her dreams was no longer clear. This isn't real. This can't be real. The distortion spread faster now, engulfing the entire room. The walls twisted and bent, the furniture disintegrating into jagged shapes that seemed to bleed into the floor. The air grew thick, almost tangible, like the weight of 100 dreams pressing in on her. And then she heard it, a voice, soft, familiar, but wrong. It wasn't just in her ears, it was in her mind, crawling inside her skull like an invasive thought. a memory that didn't belong. You've always been here. Elena, this is where you belong. Her breath caught. The voice, it was his. The figure, the one who had been haunting her, whispering to her in the dark. It was always him, always circling in the periphery of her mind. But now he was louder, closer. The walls around her continued to warp, the floor beneath her feet growing softer, like sand. She staggered backward, her hands reaching out to steady herself against the disintegrating walls. This isn't real. This isn't real. But the dream was swallowing her whole. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold on to something, anything. She couldn't distinguish between what was real and what wasn't. There were flashes of memory, moments that should have felt comforting, but only filled her with dread. Her mother's voice, Simon's smile, the laughter of her childhood friends. They were gone, replaced by this nightmare. Wake up, Elena. The voice was a whisper in her ear now, so close she could feel the breath on her skin. She spun around, but there was nothing behind her, only darkness, pulling at the edges of the room like an invisible tide. Wake up. She clutched her head in her hands, desperate to block out the sound. She couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and the voice began. She couldn't escape it. You're not awake, Elena. You never were. The words pierced her like a knife. The room shattered around her. The walls crumbled. The ceiling splintered and peeled away. The furniture dissolved into mist. The house, the illusion, the false reality, all of it faded, disintegrated into nothing. She fell, her body weightless, plummeting into the black void. And then, nothing, for what felt like an eternity. There was no sound, no light, no sensation, just the crushing weight of silence. Elena gasped, her lungs burning as she took in a breath. She was awake now, or at least she thought she was. She opened her eyes, but what she saw was nothing like the room she had been standing in moments before. It was a different place, a different world entirely. She stood in the middle of the field, the tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The sky above her was a dull, ashen gray, and the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. The horizon stretched out endlessly, no landmarks, no direction, just emptiness. Where am I? A sudden jolt of realization hit her. This isn't real. This wasn't the world she had known. It wasn't the house, the streets, or the people she had loved. It was a dream, another illusion, another layer in the false reality that had been suffocating her. But this time, she felt it deep within her soul. This wasn't a dream she could wake up from. The boundaries between her dreams and her waking life had dissolved completely. The two worlds had collided, become one, and there was no escape. In the distance, she saw a figure, dark, hooded, indistinct. It was coming closer, and the closer it came, the more she felt herself drawn toward it. She couldn't resist, because she knew, deep down, that this figure was the key to everything. And as it drew closer, Elena whispered a single word, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperate need. "Who are you?" The figure loomed before her, its presence overwhelming and all-consuming. It was cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath the folds of its hood. As it drew closer, the air around Elena grew colder, the chill creeping into her bones, sinking deep into her soul. Elena took a step back, her heart racing, a heavy sense of dread settling over her. The figure was too familiar. She couldn't place it, but it was familiar. It was as if it had always been there, lurking just beyond her vision, always present in the shadows of her mind. "Who are you?" she whispered again, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. The figure did not speak, but the air around her seemed to shift, as if it were vibrating with a message just out of reach. It felt like a dream. No, worse. It felt like a nightmare, a dream where she was both the observer and the unwilling participant. A part of her screamed to run, but her body was rooted to the spot, as if the very ground beneath her feet had claimed her. Suddenly, the figure's hooded face shifted, as if it were made of liquid shadow, swirling and merging with the darkness. There was no clear shape, no discernible features, just an overwhelming presence that filled the empty field, pressing it on her from all sides. It knows something. It's the key. Without warning, the figure raised its hand, and Elena felt a wave of something cold and ancient wash over her. It was as if her very soul were being pulled, drawn into a deep, hollow abyss. Her vision blurred, the edges of reality bending and twisting as the figure's presence seemed to consume everything around her. The field faded, replaced by flashes of images she could not control. Her mind, a fractured mirror, spun out of control. There were flashes of her childhood, of moments she had long forgotten. Her mother's tender smile, her father's comforting touch, the laughter of her younger self. But they were fading too, dissolving into a sea of darkness, replaced by another image, another memory. A room, white walls, the scent of antiseptic, people in lab coats, her own reflection, distorted and warped in the glass of a sterile window. The voices, whispers, came again. You have to choose. Elena, it's always been your choice. A sharp pain shot through her head, as if the words were knives, cutting deep into her consciousness. She collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching at her skull. It was as if something was trying to break her, to tear her mind into pieces, to splinter her identity until there was nothing left. You've been running from the truth for so long. Elena's body trembled violently as the words echoed in her mind. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps. She could feel the edges of her sanity slipping away, the tenuous grip she had on reality fading with each passing moment. And then, the choice. The figure's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, clear and unyielding. Stay in the prison of your mind, or embrace the truth. There is no other way. Elena's eyes squeezed shut, her head swimming with the weight of decision. What was the truth? What was the truth that had been hidden from her all this time? She didn't know. She couldn't know. She couldn't face it. Her mind was already fractured, on the edge of shattering completely. She had been avoiding it for so long. Could she survive it? Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to stay conscious, to keep herself from falling into the abyss. The choice. It was the price of her sanity. To live in this fractured, broken world where nothing was as it seemed, to remain in the dream, to remain in this hell of half-truths and illusions, or to wake up, to face the full brunt of the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. Tears welled in her eyes, and she could feel her throat tighten with the overwhelming weight of decision. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream, to escape, to hide from whatever it was she was meant to face. But the figure, that thing, stood there unblinking, its presence pressing down on her like the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. It would not leave her until she made the choice. It's always been your choice. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the crushing words, but they resonated deep within her, reverberating in the very marrow of her bones. There was no escape, no way out. She had to decide. Her mind screamed, begging for release, for some form of peace. She felt the darkness closing in on her, threatening to swallow her whole. The fear was suffocating, the pain unbearable. But beneath it, beneath the terror, something else stirred, something ancient, something deep inside her that whispered of strength. You can face this. She opened her eyes. The figure was still there, watching her, waiting, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she looked back at him with clarity. It was her choice. She could stay in this fractured world, a prisoner of her own mind, forever locked in the maze of illusions, or she could embrace the truth, even if it tore her apart. even if it shattered the last remnants of her sanity. The truth had always been waiting for her. The truth was the key. She stood up, her body shaking but resolute. She wasn't going to run anymore. She was going to face it. I choose the truth. The figure nodded once, its form beginning to dissolve into the air, its shadow fading away. As it vanished, the darkness around her began to dissipate, replaced by a blinding light that cut to the fog of her mind. And in that light, Elena saw it. The truth. The blinding light enveloped her, and for a brief moment, Elena felt as though she were being pulled apart, each part of her being stretched thin. The light was overwhelming, blurring everything around her, erasing the edges of her existence. She tried to focus, tried to grasp onto something, anything, but the sensation was too much. It was as if the very core of her being was being split open, exposed to the raw, unfiltered truth of the universe. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the light receded. The world around her solidified once again, and she found herself standing in a place she had never seen before. It was a room, small and dimly lit. The walls lined with bookshelves that stretched up to the ceiling, filled with ancient texts. The air smelled of dust and old paper. At the far end of the room, there was a large wooden desk, its surface cluttered with papers, notes, and an old brass lamp that cast a faint glow across the space. It felt familiar, yet alien, like stepping into a memory that was hers, but not hers at the same time. In the center of the room stood a mirror. Its surface was cracked, but not broken, its edges jagged, like the shattered remnants of something that had once been whole. The reflection it offered was distorted, as though it were a fragment of something deeper, something more. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she took a step toward it, drawn to the reflection like a moth to a flame. She peered into the mirror, searching for truth, for her truth. At first there was nothing, just a reflection of her own face, pale and tired, her eyes hollow with the weight of the journey she had endured. But then the image began to shift slowly, subtly, her reflection twisted, the edges blurring, and for a moment she thought she saw something else, something darker, more sinister, a figure standing behind her, its face hidden in shadows. She jerked back, her breath catching in her throat. The figure was gone, but the feeling remained, something cold and heavy pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She turned away from the mirror, her mind racing. What is this place? Why am I here? She felt the presence before she heard the voice. It was the same voice that had been haunting her, the same whisper in the dark, the same figure that followed her through every shadow of her mind. The figure was here again, standing in the doorway, its form still hidden beneath the cloak of darkness. "You've come so far, Elena," it said, its voice low and calm, like the deep rumble of thunder before a storm. "But now, you must make your final choice." Elena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The final choice. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that there would be a point, a breaking point, where she would have to decide once and for all. The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating her. Her mind screamed for release, for freedom, but she knew it wouldn't come, not without making the choice. "Everything you've seen, everything you felt, it has led you here," the figure continued, "to this moment, to this choice. You can stay in the dream. Elena, remain here, in this fractured world. The pain, the confusion, it will all fade, and you will live in the illusion that you created." Elena felt a shudder run through her, but she didn't speak. She couldn't speak. The figure's words echoed in her mind, reverberating through every fiber of her being. "You can stay in the comfort of your own madness," it whispered, "or you can face the truth of who you really are, of what you've done, of what's been done to you." Her heart raced. The truth. What truth? The choice is yours, the figure said, its voice growing softer, almost tender. But remember this. Once you choose, there is no turning back. The truth will destroy you, Elena. It will shatter everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you were. Elena's mind reeled. She was torn between two worlds. The illusion, the dream where she could hide from everything, where she could pretend that nothing was wrong, that she was safe. And the truth, the terrifying, painful truth that she had spent her entire life avoiding. What was the truth? A cold sweat broke out across her skin as she glanced at the mirror again. Her reflection, the real her, was still there, but the cracks in the glass seemed to be deepening, spreading like the fractures in her own soul. The longer she stood there, the more the reflection seemed to twist, to warp, until it was no longer her at all. What have I done? Her breath caught in her throat. The figure in the doorway was waiting, watching her, its presence a constant pressure. She could feel its eyes on her, could feel it judging her. The room seemed to grow smaller, the walls closing in, the air thickening with the weight of her decision. And then a memory surfaced, a memory she had long buried, a face she had tried to forget, a moment from her past that had been hidden beneath layers of lies. Her mother, the accident, the fire, the guilt. Everything began to snap into place, the puzzle pieces falling together with an unbearable finality. She understood now. She understood everything. The lies, the illusions of brokenness. It had all been connected to one single, terrible truth. She had been the one to start it all. The fire, the destruction, the lives lost. It had all been her fault. The truth would destroy her. She could feel it now, deep in her chest, a choking sensation that threatened to consume her whole. She could feel the weight of her guilt, the crushing weight of her past, pressing down on her. But she had a choice, the final choice. She could stay in the illusion, where everything was safe, where she could pretend the truth didn't exist, or she could face the consequences, face the agony of the truth, and find a way to heal the broken pieces of her soul. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cracked surface of the mirror. She could feel the warmth of the glass beneath her fingertips, the connection to her own fractured reflection. "I choose the truth," she whispered, her voice barely audible but steady. The figure's eyes, if it even had eyes, seemed to flicker in approval. The light in the room intensified, and as the darkness receded, Elena felt something shift within her. The weight, the pressure, it was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. It was like a burden that she had carried for so long, a burden that now finally had a name, the truth. And though it burned, though it threatened to tear her apart, Elena stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The light that flooded the room began to dim, its intensity fading until it was only a faint glow on the horizon of Elena's vision. But the weight, the heaviness that had settled in her chest, remained. It was a gnawing sensation, a deep and visceral knowledge that the truth she had embraced was both liberating and damning. The moment of clarity was fleeting, like a candle flickering in a storm. Its light, however bright, was doomed to extinguish. Her heart still raced as she stood before the shattered mirror, the cracks in its surface widening, revealing glimpses of a deeper darkness lurking behind the glass. She could feel it, could sense the abyss that lay just beyond her reach. "It's done," the figure whispered, its voice a soft murmur, yet it echoed with finality that chilled her bones. Elena glanced around the room. The walls, once sturdy, began to dissolve into a haze of smoke and shadow, as though they were never real in the first place. The desk and shelves faded into nothingness, leaving only the abyss, an infinite, yawning chasm that stretched out before her. The floor beneath her feet felt as though it had given way, plunging her into a void. The cold air brushed against her skin, carrying with it an oppressive silence. She was no longer in the room with the mirror. She was no longer in the world she had known. She was falling. It was as if the very ground had disappeared beneath her, and she was free falling into the unknown. Her limbs flailed as the blackness consumed her, the sensation of weightlessness unsettling in its cruel, detached stillness. Time seemed irrelevant. There was no up, no down, no sense of direction. Only the abyss, deep and unyielding, stretching out in every direction. But even as the darkness swallowed her whole, Elena felt it, the deep, gnawing pull of something beneath the surface. A presence, something dark, something that had always been there, waiting for her to reach it. You want to know the truth, the voice whispered. You wanted to see everything, to understand. But now you must face it. Her mind reeled, the weight of the choice bearing down on her like an unrelenting force. She had made her decision. She had embraced the truth. But what did that mean? What had she truly uncovered? The memories, the fragments, they all rushed back, filling her consciousness. But each memory now felt like a jigsaw puzzle that no longer fit together. It was as if the pieces of her life had splintered, scattering in every direction. The fire, her mother, the accident, the guilt. She could see the image in her mind now, clearer than ever. Her mother's face, twisted in pain, a look of betrayal. The burning building, the suffocating smoke that had filled her lungs. The screams, the fire, and the realization, so sharp and cruel, struck her with the force of 1,000 shards of glass. She had been there. She had been the one who had caused it. She had been the one who had started the fire. The memories flooded back, unbidden, and the weight of what she had done threatened to crush her. She had thought she could escape, that the illusion would protect her. But now she understood. There was no escaping the truth. There was no escaping the abyss. The figure, the shadow, was now beside her, though she had not seen it approach. It loomed at the edge of her vision, its presence a constant, oppressive weight. The darkness around her grew thicker, pressing in on her, suffocating her with its cold embrace. And yet, she could not look away. It was as if the figure was the only thing holding her to reality. Or perhaps it was drawing her in, dragging her deeper into the void. You face the truth, the figure said, its voice a low, almost melodic tone. Now you must face yourself. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. The abyss seemed endless, but there was something else, a flicker of movement, just on the edge of her vision. She turned toward it, her heart thundering in her chest. In the distance, a silhouette appeared, faint at first but slowly growing clearer. It was a figure, but not like the one she had seen before. This one was more familiar. It was her. Elena stared at the figure, her own reflection, but not quite. It was her, but it wasn't. The figure was distorted, as though it were an echo of herself, a fractured version of who she once was. Her face was shadowed, her features distorted, as if she had been carved from darkness itself. "Is that you?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. The figure nodded slowly, its movements mirroring her own, but in a jerky, unnatural way. "I am what you become," it said, its voice a low rasp. "I am the part of you that you've denied, the part of you that you've hidden away in the depths of your mind, the part of you that caused the fire, the part of you that refuses to acknowledge the truth." Elena stumbled back, her mind reeling. "This was me?" "Yes," the figure replied, its voice cold without empathy. "This is the real you, the one who burned everything down, the one who destroyed everything you loved." A sharp pain pierced through Elena's chest. It was as if her heart had fractured, each beat sending shards of agony through her body. She wanted to scream, to flee, to escape the vision of herself, but she couldn't. She was trapped. This was her. This was who she really was. The guilt, the shame, the darkness. It had always been inside her. The figure stepped forward. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an unsettling, malevolent light. You've fallen into the abyss now, Elena. There is no way out. Elena's breath quickened. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't outrun the truth anymore. The abyss was within her, and it was consuming her. The darkness had taken root in her soul, and there was no light to pull her from it. She closed her eyes, but even in the darkness, she could still feel it, the weight of the truth, the crushing, suffocating weight of everything she had done. And as the abyss threatened to swallow her whole, Elena understood one thing with terrifying clarity. There was no coming back. The darkness that enveloped Elena was all-consuming, a thick, oppressive void that seemed to swallow her whole. The weight of the abyss pressed against her, threatening to crush her under its immense gravity. Her mind, already fractured and splintered by the truth, couldn't bear the strain. She felt herself sinking deeper, as if the darkness were a whirlpool, pulling her into its center, where there would be no escape, no hope. But even as she fell, something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance, a fragile thread of light that refused to be extinguished. It was a strange feeling, almost alien, given the crushing despair that had ruled her for so long. The truth had shattered her, but perhaps it hadn't destroyed her completely. She could feel the weight of the figure, the distorted, twisted version of herself, looming closer, its presence a constant pressure. Yet, as the figure stepped into the flickering light of her consciousness, Elena could sense a shift. It was subtle at first, a mere whisper against the overwhelming silence, but it grew louder, more insistent, until it became undeniable. You have been living in the shadows of your own guilt. The voice of the figure spoke again. But now, you must see the truth for what it truly is. Elena felt her heart lurch, the breath trapped in her chest. The voice, the shadow, had always been there, a haunting presence in her mind. It had taunted her, pushed her to the edge, but now it felt different. The words were not a command. They were an invitation to understand. The truth, Elena whispered, her voice raw, trembling. The truth about me is I destroyed everything. I destroyed my family. I caused a fire. I killed my mother. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, but they weren't a confession. They weren't a final verdict on her soul. They were a revelation, a recognition of the weight she had carried for so long, the burden that had defined her existence. The figure did not respond. Its shadowy form merely loomed over her, watching, waiting. Elena could feel its cold presence. But this time, it was no longer a force of oppression. It was just a presence. It was hers. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, it wasn't me. The words felt like a confession, but they weren't born from guilt. They were born from something else, a spark of realization, something that had been buried beneath the layers of her self-doubt and fear. It was a flicker of clarity, something she had denied for so long. It wasn't me, she repeated, more firmly this time. It wasn't my fault. The abyss around her seemed to hold its breath, the shadows receding slightly as if the world was listening, waiting for the truth to unfold. The fire, the destruction, the night that had shattered her life. It had never been her fault. Not really. In that moment, Elena understood the full weight of her past. She wasn't the cause of the fire. She hadn't been the one who had set it. She hadn't been the one to bring the darkness. It had been someone else. Her mother. The secrets her mother had kept buried for so long. Elena had been running from them, avoiding them, because she was too afraid to face the truth. But the truth was this. Her mother had made a choice long before the fire, a choice that had set everything into motion, a choice that Elena had never known about, because her mother had never told her. The revelation hit her like a wave, drowning her in the sudden rush of understanding. Her mother's actions, her choices, had caused a tragedy. Elena had been a victim in all of this, not the perpetrator. She had blamed herself for years because she didn't know the full story. She had blamed herself because her mind, twisted and broken by the events, had created a lie that said she was the one responsible. But now the truth was clear. The fire, the pain, the guilt, it had never been hers to bear alone. She had been a child caught in the wake of her mother's decisions, her mother's secrets. The shadows around her began to dissipate. The darkness that had once suffocated her now retreating into the corners of the abyss. Elena's body trembled, but not from fear, from a strange sense of relief. It was as if the weight that had been pressing on her for so long had been lifted, piece by piece, until she could finally breathe again. You were never meant to carry this burden, the figure. Her shadow spoke softly, almost tenderly. You were never meant to bear this alone. Elena closed her eyes, allowing the truth to wash over her. She had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, thinking it was her fault, but it had never been hers to bear. The guilt, the shame, they had been placed on her by forces beyond her control. And now, at long last, she was free. As the shadows receded entirely, Elena stood at the edge of the abyss, no longer falling, no longer trapped in the darkness. She was standing in the light. The cold air that had once been suffocating now felt like a gentle breeze against her skin. She was free. The figure in front of her, the reflection of her fractured soul, began to fade, its presence dissipating into the ether. There was no need for it anymore. Elena had faced it, had seen it for what it was, and in doing so, had freed herself from its grip. She was no longer the broken, confused woman who had been running from the truth. She was Elena, the woman who had finally found her way back to herself, the woman who had embraced the truth, no matter how painful it was, and emerged from the darkness, stronger and more whole than before. The abyss had been a place of fear, of isolation, but now it was a place of revelation. The truth had been painful, but it had set her free, and as the light enveloped her completely, Elena stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next, because now, for the first time in years, she knew she could.